run at InfoWarsLife.com. That's InfoWarsLife.com or call 888-253-3139.
The issue of man-made climate change came to the Texas Capitol. Two high-ranking spokesmen for the Center of Naval Analysis spoke of climate change as a national security threat. Rear Admiral Neil Morsetti.
If we act in a coherent and coordinated fashion, not only will we reduce the risk posed to national security and the calls upon our respective armed forces, but we'll enjoy the economic benefits and the better quality of life that comes with that. And I'd just like to conclude by saying there is no security solution to climate change, just greater insecurity if we don't act. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sounds reasonable, right? I don't have a problem as long as he doesn't call for a carbon tax.
Within Europe as a whole, money is coming from the emissions trading scheme, where there's a price on carbon. And
is that a tax, just a straight-up tax, or is it a credit?
It's all intents and purposes is a tax. Yeah.
And there's the carbon tax. The carbon tax being something to encourage citizens to reduce their carbon emissions. Meanwhile, military conflicts leave huge carbon footprints, not to mention weapons for our enemies to use against us, but that's another story.
But the debate is settled. Climate change is a fact. And when our children's children look us in the eye and ask if we did all we could to leave them a safer, more stable world with new sources of energy, I want us to be able to say, yes, we did.
You've probably heard that before, that all credible scientists follow the narrative of man-made climate change. But as the founder of the Weather Channel points out, science isn't a consensus.
When you see the government, when you see NASA, when you see other institutions say that 97% of climate scientists agree, do you think they're making it up? What I don't understand is how you square that.
Well, that's a manipulated figure, and let me explain it to you. The government puts out about $2.5 billion directly for climate research every year. It only gives that money to scientists who will produce scientific results that support the global warming hypothesis.
And in that full debate, the CNN anchor pitted Mr. Coleman against the CEO of the Weather Channel, who is a businessman, not a scientist. But let's address some of the concerns by those who warn of climate change.
Greenland would also raise sea level almost 20 feet if it went. If Greenland broke up and melted, or if half of Greenland and half of West Antarctica broke up and melted, this is what would happen to the sea level in Florida. This is what would happen to San Francisco Bay. A lot of people live in...
Last I checked, that hasn't happened.
Scientists reported with unprecedented alarm that the North Polar ice cap is, in their words, falling off a cliff. One study estimated that it could be completely gone during summer in less than 22 years. Another new study to be presented by U.S. Navy researchers later this week warns it could happen in as little as 7 years. 7 years from now.
It's been more than 7 years since Gore stated that study, and that hasn't happened either. But I do appreciate him being bold enough to reference studies, because now climate change, quote, experts refuse to make any concrete predictions or forecast.
So when it's cold, should we then say, oh, no problem, don't worry about climate change?
No, let's not confuse or interchange climate change with global warming. The world is getting warmer. There's more carbon dioxide holding in more heat. So when the climate changes, some places get colder. And the thing that's really consistent with climate change models is this variance, where it's cold, it's warm, it's cold, it's warm.
I'll play that again so you can hear how he's coaching the anchor to be vague.
The world is getting warmer. There's more carbon dioxide holding in more heat. So when the climate changes, some places get colder. And the thing that's really consistent with climate change models is this variance, where it's cold, it's warm, it's cold, it's warm.
Don't say global warming, because if it's cold, people won't take you seriously. Don't say global cooling, because if it's hot outside, people are going to laugh at you. Use the all-inclusive term of climate change, so that way if it's hot, you'll be right. If it's cold outside, you'll be right. If it rains outside, you'll be right. If it's drought, you'll also be right. You may have heard that 2014 was the warmest year on record. I think they should add an addendum to that title, 2014, the warmest year on record with the exception of Chicago, Illinois, which was the coldest in 100 years. 2014, the warmest year on record with the exception of the Great Lakes that froze onto the land masses. But remember, call it climate change, so regardless of whether it's hot or cold, you'll be right.
It's cold, it's warm, it's cold, it's warm.
Now, let's talk about melting ice.
Visual proof of Mendenhall's steady retreat.
Now, in the winter, will this come back? The retreat will tend to slow down in the wintertime.
Okay.
And maybe it even stabilizes or creeps forward a tiny little bit. But boy, as soon as the warming season comes back on, it continues to gobble itself backwards.
I definitely do recognize that ice melted, but I also remember this.
Another new study to be presented by U.S. Navy researchers later this week warns it could happen in as little as 7 years.
So is it possible that ice melted and then refroze someplace else? Just like we saw the ice of the Great Lakes, it froze onto the landmass and then melted back into the Great Lakes, and I'm sure it will do it again. Later on in that same report, they blamed Hurricane Sandy damage on climate change. And as I'm sure any 12-year-old science student can tell you, there have always been floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, long before coal power plants, big oil, and SUVs. And to be clear, I'm not here cheerleading for big oil. I definitely recognize the BP spill and all the problems that caused. With that said, I make no money from big oil, but I also don't want to give my money to big carbon tax. You can find more reports on INFOWARS.com.
Another major health threat, this one in Toledo, Ohio, where everybody in the entire city has been told not to drink the water.
Ohio's governor declaring a state of emergency.
Did you know that the average person uses about 80 to 100 gallons of water at home every single day? If there's a water emergency, will you be prepared?
Panicked residents forming long lines throughout the day.
We're here at a supermarket in Toledo. You can see the shelves empty where water once was.
To stay safe and healthy during a crisis, you must have access to safe, clean water. Water which will not be available at your local grocery store.
There's a mad dash on right now to stock up on supplies.
The ProPure Pro 1 G2.0 water filtration system is a must-have for every modern, independently minded household. Protect your family's safety during an emergency. Go to InfoWarsStore.com today to purchase your ProPure Pro 1 G2.0 water filtration system or call 1-888-253-3139.
Introducing Secret 12, the new InfoWars Life vitamin B12 formulation. Most forms of vitamin B12 are highly processed and synthetic and could not be properly absorbed by the body. That's why for real results, so many are having to turn to painful B12 injections, which are known to have higher absorption rates. Now, InfoWarsLife.com is excited to announce that we can bring you our most bioactive, powerful form of B12 that has been developed with our exclusive perfected process. Secret 12 is a binary of nutramedical grade, bioavailable coenzyme forms of B12, methylcobalamin, the same kind used in B12 injections, and adenosylcobalamin. Secret 12 is simply taken by mouth, right on the tongue, and then swallowed. No needles, no injections. Don't take my word for it. Try it for yourself. Discover the secret. Secret 12. Secure your revolutionary Secret 12 formula right now at InfoWarsLife.com or call 888-253-3139.
Well, for the last several days, our reporters have been in Chicago investigating the reports from The Guardian of a black interrogation site there. People being held for days without being formally charged or arraigned, people being tortured, and in some cases, people dying. We've had reports of eyewitnesses as well as lawyers. And so our reporters went there to cover the protests against this, as well as to see if there were other black sites. Well, joining us now is Joe Biggs in Chicago. Joe, you tried to find some of these other sites that have been reported to you. What did you find out?
So far, we've been unlucky trying to find any of these other sites. We've been chasing leads, going to different locations. So far, these sites are a bust. It's looking like the one at Homan Square is possibly the main one, if there are any other ones in this area. But the big question is, if they're in Homan Square, they're in Chicago, there's probably a good chance they're operating in those same kind of facilities in Detroit, LA, other places like that. Really large cities with a lot of crime.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting to see how this was tracked down by The Guardian, essentially looking at a Chicago police detective who was involved in Guantanamo, tracing it back to there, and then this has all got its roots really in the war on drugs. It seems to be where we see so many of these abuses, but now we see that Obama and Rahm Emanuel have taken this, I think, perhaps to the national level. That's what we're all very concerned about. Not that this is just some kind of an aberration of the war on drugs in Chicago, but that it is something that would be extended across the country.
Yeah, there's a good chance that this could be a testing ground, a proving ground for many other facilities that open up across the country. I mean, at the end of the day, this is the direction it looks like we're going to in America. More of these detention, off the book, off the record kind of sites where people are disappeared, held without their rights, not able to call lawyers, not essentially just a blackout with communications with the outside world. I mean, that's got to be a horrible, horrible feeling, being held in one of these places, shackled and beaten, and not having any contact with the outside world, not being able to speak to your lawyer and knowing if you're ever going to get out of there alive.
And that's exactly what the NDAA was all about. Everybody was concerned that you could be arrested, never charged with anything, held indefinitely, even rendered out of the country to be interrogated, to be tortured. But of course, seeing that here in Chicago, whether or not it is something that has come out of that, or whether it's just a product of the war on drugs, which really the war on terror has really grown out of that as well. A lot of the same tactics, creating a situation, using that to destroy the rule of law, using that to corrupt the police department and law enforcement. That's what we're really concerned about. When you talk to people on the streets, and you had some men on the street interviews today, does there seem to be any more awareness of it after this weekend?
Quite frankly, it's pretty sad, David. There's not many people who have any clue as to what Homan Square is, yet alone the horrific things that are happening behind those closed doors. Maybe a small handful of people actually even knew what it was, but they still didn't have the full details about the whistleblowers who've come out talking about, you know, the defense attorney Anthony Hill saying that this place is off the record, off the books. People are being disappeared. They're being tortured. They're being shackled. They're being treated like terrorists of Guantanamo Bay. Some people, I mean, for the most part, had no idea that this was in their backyard. And when I talked to them today, it was the first they'd ever heard about it. That's where the big problem is. There's this huge blackout in the mainstream media. They're not talking about it whatsoever. I mean, I would want to know, if I was a Chicagoan, that there was a torture facility in my city. And the news, they're not doing their job covering it. They brush it off, they laugh it off. Even though the police don't care, they're joking about it, and they think it's a funny situation. I don't think it's funny.
Absolutely. You know, for the last 20 years, I've been involved with various groups trying to bring attention to what was going on in the war on drugs, for instance, with civil asset forfeiture, with the abuses of SWAT teams, and the mainstream media was not reporting it. For the longest time, it's only been within the last year or so that we see a general awareness of the abuses of SWAT teams, the abuses of civil asset forfeiture, where they can go in and just confiscate your property without ever charging you with a crime. For many decades, we're talking to people about this, and they would say, well, that's just one particular case, or that's just that one corrupt police department. They didn't understand how pervasive it was. Finally, we see that happening, but it's not because of the mainstream media. For 20 years, the mainstream media didn't cover this. So if people become aware of this, if they understand that this is really setting a precedent, perhaps this is something, as we've had many reports of, it's been going on for many, many years, long before Obama went to Washington. Is this something that Obama brought to Washington, put into the NDAA? It's something we all need to be concerned about, not just people in Chicago.
Yes, exactly. And one of the interesting things, too, there was one guy who had heard about the situation at Homan Square, but he still didn't believe it whatsoever. He says, yeah, I heard about it. He's like, but the Chicago PD is a very corrupt police force. And he says he thinks that a lot of people just have it out for him. And that's what this whole story is coming from, is that it was a lot of people who have harsh feelings about the Chicago PD and the tactics they use. Therefore, the story was created to kind of get back, he said, at the Chicago Police Department.
That's the problem, is the compartmentalization of people. They think that, well, this is just the police attacking black people, or this is just one police department in Chicago. They don't see the big picture. The bottom line is, even if that were true, even if this was limited to Chicago and limited in Chicago to just Homan Square, it is part of the lawlessness that's come along.